Since the crisis started, government taken many policies, and furthermore, member states have so far committed to prove liquidity support for the sector facing disruptions and companies facing liquidity shortages, consisting of public guarantee schemes and different tax payments, which are now estimated at 16% of EU GDP, upon from the 10% of on the month of March. And the Minister of Finance stand ready to take further measures as needed as development unfold, like flexibility in euro rules, uses of the European Union budgets and monetary policies, financial stability, like many other. In euro, there is a lot of fluctuations in euro, right? Some sometimes it's going up and sometimes it's going down towards. In order to keep the economic running, the EU executives introducing the flexibility for the funds and the national expenditure. Member states approved a safety net of liquidity for countries, workers, and companies involving the ESM, EAB, and Commission. And EU leaders agreed on the need to work out a recovery plan from the bloc in the coming months. You like to look into the detail of the EU economic response to the COVID-19 outbreak. Coming to the ECB, Euro area financial conditions have tightened significantly in response to the global outbreak of the COVID-19. Financial conditions indicates which summarize our monetary policies since by considering price movements in equity, bond, foreign exchange, and money markets signaled an unpredictably sharp and about degree of tighten in recent weeks. Those actions are first to restore the orderly functioning of euro area financial markets, which suffered from an extraordinary degree of voluntarily fast de-risking and then liquidity conditions, and second to ensure that accommodative monetary policies continued to be transmitted to all parts of the single currency area, thereby supporting funds and households in shielding the substantial economic and the social costs that this crisis would impede. And coming to the treasury bonds of the banks, one of the key remaining issues for the completion of the banking union is the concentrated exposure of banks in many countries to their own properties. A number of contributions have argued that banks should be discouraged from holding too much government debt and in particular should be discouraged from adding too much debt of their own government. The key counter arguments is that banks should be allowed to buy large amounts of their own properties because of this way they can stabilize the market in crisis. There are two main reasons why banks buying the bonds of their domestic governments cannot have the large positive impacts on bond prices. One is banks are only intermediates, and the second one, banks have a higher cost of funding. A lot of banks are gaining funds from the like IMF and other European countries, and they are funding to poorest countries. So they are getting the higher fundings. And coming to the IMF, at the International Monetary Fund, they are actively deploying $1 trillion lending capacity to supporting the damaged countries, including through rapid distribution, emergency fund financing, and debt services relief to our poorest member countries. And they are calling official bilateral credits to the same. And there are lot of hopeful signs that healthcare crisis will end. Countries are succeeding in containing the virus using social distancing distancing practices, testing, and the contact testing, at least for now. And treatments and vacancies may develop sooner than expected. And IMF are going to help the poorest countries like Italy, Spain. A lot of countries are gaining amount from the IMF, and IMF ready to give the amount from the poorest countries. And there is a high chance to increase the infection in these days. So government take too many precautions to reduce the infection levels. States are struggling to process a historic mountain of unemployment claims on outdated technology. Large corporations, including the companies, slammed by the social distancing edicts, keep people at the home, remain the dark on the details of promises loans. Small business by the millions are desperately seeking cash, while banks still lack the right paperwork days into the lending program. And hoping for the recession is done in the as soon as faster. And compared to the other countries, the EU is recovering very fastly to the COVID-19, and the effect will gradually decreasing. Hoping for the
With all the uncertainty and fear countries are facing, populations can start speculating as to what our future looks like. However, one thing that makes this recent health crisis different from prior crises like the 1918 influenza pandemic that infected a third of the world and killed tens of millions of people is modern technology. Not just modern vaccines, but the biggest radical innovation that we can't seem to live without today, the internet. We're in the digital era, right? So the internet has actually afforded some aspects of commerce to keep functioning, and globally, you have governments, leaders, businesses, and individuals that are still connected and communicating within our global network with all of our worldwide mobile device and internet use. So you can find plenty of articles now that take the position that this pandemic is not necessarily creating new problems for humans and their way of life, but rather it's exposing the already existing problems that have been growing issues like proactive healthcare needs or healthcare reform concerns, inefficient government leaders and misappropriated use of government funds, demographic human inequalities and the injustices of that, the imbalance of global GDPs and why the most powerful countries with technological advancements and intellectual property like invaluable drug patents have the right to set limits on how the rest of the world can use these things. So we can expect that trade reform topics will be rising to the surface of political discussions. And there's also things that we see happening with our food chain supplies. A lot of waste is happening at our mega farms where they're dumping out products that they can't distribute, that they can't get to the consumers. So it's going to waste, and we can probably expect to see things like scarcity or inflated pricing on meat and animal byproducts. For example, I can't seem to find my American cottage cheese that I like because it's imported from Germany. First world problem, sure. And it seems like in today's developed countries, consumers are highly detached from our food sources. So we don't actually know so much what it's like to actually kill a chicken to eat it for dinner, or what goes into harvesting a garden or orchard to put produce on the table. So maybe in the not too distant future, we can see cities and communities proactively bringing their food sources closer to home, even here in Europe. Maybe we're going to see an innovation movement towards local hydroponic growers and distributors. Maybe even program initiatives to help fund communal gardening on rooftops. Remember that idea? Yeah, it all goes back to agriculture in a sense, right? And there are the environmental factors that shouldn't be downplayed. Also, we see things like the rivers cleaning up, the Venice canals that are clear, that you can actually see the fish life have returned to, and our air is actually cleaner with factories closing and the interruption of vehicles on our roadways. And based on a Financial Times report tracker, since the time that China actually started mandating confinement, there have been notable improvements in our atmosphere. So it may sound a little hippie to me, but I would hope that it creates a compelling argument for governments and businesses to take note. And already we see corporations making efforts to improve on things like their like things on their sustainable development goals based on the UN environmental concerns, and also factors related to corporate social responsibility. So in addition, big corporations have an interest in advancing innovation, maybe even more so than governments. So there's this maybe bold idea that all of these effects of our current pandemic are simply speeding up our transition into this new wave in technology and innovation, evolution, our fourth technological revolution, letting humans know what innovations we're missing to improve our lives, not just in Europe, but for all global citizens. And if you consider what crowdsourcing, for example, has done for businesses, seeking outside sources to solve their business problems, and in return, what microloans are doing or microfinancing are doing to elevate the standard of lives in emerging countries. As the public, speaking of the global population here, becomes more aware of the benefits of sharing the wealth, if you would, the human potential and future is maximized. So there's going to be critics, and if you focus right now on how divided governments have become and how this virus will compound existing complications in the EU or around Europe, including shared recovery funds and how that may work, we know that politics seems to have become very polarized in recent years. And in my mind, this is just a reflection of the inequalities that people are ever more mindful of in both developing and emerging economies. And big global corporations with large foreign investments, like I said, have maybe a big investment now in policy reforms, even more than the country governments also. And governments seem more concerned with taking care of their own, which is a valid response. But as the risks of the virus subside, we may very well find more citizens dissatisfied with their current government, wanting to see things change. So this is just a guess, but my suspicion is that it will take our strong, respectable business leaders, and not the bad guys though, along with grassroots community activists, putting pressure on governments to make reforms on a global scale, along with taking initiative for action themselves. So rather than waiting for governments to make the reforms needed and put pressure on government, they will be likely to fund new innovations. So some of those millionaires that have money in their pocket that can help out will help this recession, or help us recover from a recession. And small community groups as well, working together, unifying and making sure people get taken care of. So as far as a long-term recession, it seems more than likely that the virus will cause countries to stay on high alert, especially across Europe, where Italy and France and Spain, some countries have been hit pretty hard, harder than the northern part, Finland, and those other countries. Some commerce has been able to stay alive, and it just shows how adaptable and resilient people have been. So all throughout confinement, by way of internet, there have been journalists and businesses arguing for years now that remote or telework is the mode of the future, and it's making traditional large offices more obsolete. So there's things even like work pods that people have purchased to have quiet closet spaces to actually work inside their residence. So it's an innovation based off of repurposing the idea of the phone booth or those red telephone boxes across London. So there's been a move now on how to introduce artificial intelligence to take over actuary or data analysis jobs. So this type of destructive innovation, although it can seem scary and it takes jobs away, it can actually open up the market to new types of jobs, and we just don't know what these may be exactly right now, but it is exciting to think about. And there's maybe just one last esoteric thought that maybe this COVID-19 may end up being a divine innovation itself that will help expedite our human existence into a future of more global awareness, global unity, and global prosperity. Thank you.